Keith. So one of my favorite bands growing up was Motley Crue. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I listened to them a lot when I was a kid. I knew all the words. I've gone to 4 Motley Crue concerts. Very excited about that through the years. I went to my first one when I was in college, and then I've gone to several others since then. And I've always been really into the band. I like their music. I like to work out to their music. And there's a lot going on now with this new filing, a civil lawsuit by the lead guitarist, Mick Mars. He filed a lawsuit against Motley Crue and all of its entities. And YouTube is doing a great job. There's some great YouTubers that are covering this story, and they're giving us all the insights into it. But the one thing I think you and I can add is that we're lawyers and we litigate on a regular basis. And while we don't do entertainment law, we can talk about the anatomy of a lawsuit, and that's what I'd like to do today. But I do want to give 2 shout outs. One is to Justin Hawkins. Justin Hawkins Rides Again. Justin Hawkins is a modern day philosopher. I mean, he's fantastic. He talks about all kinds of things, but here's his YouTube channel, and he did a great post yesterday on the Mick Mars situation. And he's just a really bright guy. And I'm hoping people can run over, check out his channel, check out this video. It's fantastic. It's only 15 minutes long. And then the YouTube channel that kind of got all this started and did a really good job initially of explaining what was going on here is Rockfeed. And you can run over and check out their YouTube channel as well. And they've got 3 or 4 of these stories on what's going on with the Mick Mars versus Motley Crue lawsuit. But what I wanted to do, Keith, is I wanted us to talk about the anatomy of a lawsuit. So we're California lawyers. We're in Los Angeles court all the time, doing lawsuits there. And I wanted to pull up the complaint that was filed by Mick Mars and present that. One quick thing before we do that, I do want to point out who Mick Mars' attorney is. And it's Edwin F. McPherson, and here he is, and he's at McPherson LLP. I'm assuming they do mostly entertainment law, but here he is. You can go to McPherson-LLP.com and look him up, and I mean, he's got quite an impressive background according to his profile here. So head on over and you can see who Mick Mars' attorney is and who's the individual that is responsible for the legal prosecution of this matter. One last thing, here's Motley Crue, and this is their current website. And you can see they still have Mick Mars here. Here's Mick Mars listed as guitar. You got really the leader of the band in Nikki Sixx, the most outspoken member of the band. You got Tommy Lee, who many people are familiar with even outside of Motley Crue, being married to Pamela Anderson and so forth, not any longer. And then the lead singer, Vince Neal, who's in the news quite a bit, recently because of his singing performances and so forth. So that's what we have going on here. Let me switch over to the complaint, Keith, and I'd love to get your insights into what is going on here. One second. Okay, do you see the complaints in front of you?
I do, yes.
Okay, so as I previously was pointing out, you've got, I'm sorry, one second here. I've got a little bit of an issue. You can see here, this is the Edwin F. McPherson we talked about, and he's been a lawyer for quite some time. You've got an associate or maybe a junior partner here, and they're in Los Angeles, and you can see this was filed on April 6, 2023. When you look at this caption, Keith, just what grabs you about this caption? Is there anything in particular?
There's a number of things. The first thing is look at all those entities. And so as we go through this, we're going to see that there's quite a few corporate entities that the band is a part of, and Mick Mars in particular is a shareholder and apparently was an officer and director of. And so, yeah, look at all those. I mean, you have the Motley Crue Touring, Motley Crue Inc., the Red, White, and Crew, the Masters 2000, Crew Fest, Motley Records, Masters 2008. So I've heard a lot of talk, and everybody's been talking about how the band wants to stop Mick Mars from being able to earn his 25% when they go out and tour again. And, some people are saying, well, that seems fair, which, on the surface of it, that would seem fair. But I think that there's a lot more going on here than just the touring revenue. And if you think about a band like Motley Crue that's been around forever, it's not surprising that they have this many corporate entities, and they probably make money in all sorts of different ways. So they have past recordings that are played. Some of their songs are in movies or television shows. They get revenue from that. They have, all sorts of, I'm sure, merchandise that they still sell both online, not just on tours. There's just endless amount of ways that these bands make money. And so they go through different corporate entities, which is not unusual. And it appears as though the band is trying to kick Mick Mars out of all of these entities. And so that's where we really get into some interesting complexities. But the first thing that popped out to me was, wow, that's a lot of entities. And then the second thing that popped out is that this is a verified petition for writ of mandate. It is not a complaint. And so typically when you file a lawsuit, you file a complaint and that begins the lawsuit. So that begs the question, why are they filing a petition for writ of mandate against all of these entities? What is the purpose of them doing that versus filing a complaint, which is what you normally would do when you sue an entity? And, I have some thoughts on that, but I don't know if you want to weigh in on that, Stewart.
Well, just the fact that it's verified, I think that we should explain that in most cases, when you file a lawsuit against somebody in Los Angeles, let's say, you file what we call a general complaint, and it's not verified, meaning it's not sworn under penalty of perjury that everything in that complaint is true. And that keeps you from getting in trouble down the road in the case as discovery develops, as facts develop, from maybe overstating your case and then having that held against you. Here, we have a verified complaint. So Mick Mars is actually saying, I promise everything I'm saying in this complaint is true, and I can back it up. And so this is a big deal. One thing that pops out at me here is that I guess the members of Motley Crue, or maybe Nikki Sixx particularly, the bassist for Motley Crue, has been giving, according to Mick Mars, a hard time over the years about his playing abilities and that he was missing notes and so forth. Here, Mick Mars has pointed out that Nikki Sixx didn't play a single note on their last summer tour because everything was pre-recorded. And that's something that Nikki Sixx has come out and said many times that's not something the band does. And so this is a verified statement by Mick Mars saying this is happening. And so now how does Motley Crue respond to that? Because how do you answer a verified complaint, Keith? Can you just generally deny it, or what do you have to do?
Yeah, that's the big difference. So if you filed a lawsuit and it's not verified, then the defendant only has to file what we call a general denial, which is literally a judicial counsel form. It's a one-page form. You say, I deny everything, and that's that. And the lawsuit gets off and running. When you have a verified document filed, whether it's a petition, complaint, whatever it is, you have to have a verified response. So now all of these entities in Motley Crue, they have to file a verified response to this. And so they have to go on public record and verify their response. Now, the response could be very simple and just say, we admit paragraph 1, we deny paragraph 2. They don't have to go into a whole lot of details, but it is an interesting strategy to verify. Well, that's verified because it's a petition, but it's interesting to force the band into the public forum and force them to have to respond with a verified response, which is now what they have to do, which is a more in-depth response than what a general denial would be if it wasn't verified.
Okay, and let's talk just briefly about, this is just the beginning step in a lawsuit. You have some type of filing, and that's what's occurred here. Now there will be a period of written discovery that can take place. There'll be some orders by the court. In the meantime, perhaps some records will be ordered to be provided to Mick Mars and his legal representatives so they can go through and see how much money the crew has made on tour and how much of that they're going to argue should be paid to Mick Mars. And we're going to get into a contract that was signed all the way back in 1987 in just a minute. And you can walk us through what Motley Crue's view of whether Mick Mars should be paid his 25% interest in the band versus their view that, hey, we're on tour and you've kind of abandoned us, in other words, and because you've abandoned us, we don't have to pay you for touring revenue. But we'll take a look at that in a second. But here we're going to get into filing of the lawsuit. Some written discovery will likely be done. And then the part that I think is the most interesting is that there will be oral depositions. These are sworn depositions. These are where Nikki Sixx will have to show up and sit across the table from Mick Mars' attorney. And Mick Mars' attorney is allowed to ask him questions under the penalty of perjury. And I'm sure this is going to be a videotape deposition. And in that videotape deposition, Mick Mars' attorney is going to be asking Nikki Sixx, Tommy Lee, Vince Neal, is music being pumped into these concerts? Nikki Sixx, is your bass actually hooked up when you're playing it? Are you actually playing live notes during the concert? And this, I think, is going to really help Mick Mars, because he was playing live, and we know he's playing live because Nikki told him several times, hey, you're hitting the wrong notes. But it sounds like Nikki wasn't hitting any notes, according to Mick Mars. Now, it may come out that that was an overstatement by Mick Mars, but those depositions are going to be fascinating, because you can't lie in them. And if you do lie in them, it's not only these four members of the band that know what's going on. There's got to be computer techs that know what's going on. There's got to be roadies that know what's going on.
Or the sound mixers. What about the guys that work the big board? They're mixing the sound. I mean, they know if something's being pre-recorded or not, because they're the ones that have to blend it in.
Right. So, all right, well, let's move on.
There's one more point about the front page that I want to talk about just real quickly. So somewhere in this petition, it talks about how the band has compelled arbitration. So I suspect that there's probably an arbitration clause in one of the shareholders agreement. I don't know that for a fact. We don't have those documents. We have not reviewed them, but that's what they said. And so rather than filing a complaint to sue in civil court, in superior court, which you can't do if you have an arbitration clause, it looks like what they did is a verified petition for writ of mandate to get documents from these entities. I think that's a brilliant strategy move, because what it does is it allows them to come out into the public forum and air all this dirty laundry, which I think is what the legal team for Mick Mars wanted to do in order to force the issue into a more public forum. And so I thought that was a really interesting way to go about it.
And so just to be clear then, if they are forced into arbitration, that will take it out of the court, the Los Angeles County court, and also take it outside, more than likely, of a jury trial. And it'll be a private judge kind of privately reviewing all this, and how much of it gets public, we don't know.
And most arbitrations are confidential. And so I suspect that Mick Mars probably wasn't able to file a complaint, a regular civil lawsuit in Los Angeles court. And so his lawyer came up with what looks like a brilliant strategy, which is, well, that's fine. We'll just file this writ and ask the court to order that they hand over documents, which they're allowed to do. And now it's a public filing that all these news sources could go down and get a copy of. And now it's all over the news. So really interesting strategy. I like it.
So you can see here the introduction of the lawsuit. What Mick Mars is alleging, that he built this band for 41 years with the other founding members of Motley Crue. He's a founding member. There was three others: Nikki Sixx, Tommy Lee, and Vince Neal. And he built this, and he had to retire due to a debilitating disease that affects his spine and his bones. And so he could no longer go on regular tours with the band. But he said he was still available to them for residency situations. He could record with them. He just couldn't handle the physical rigors of the road. And according to Mick Mars, what his brothers of 41 years did is they fired him. They fired him from every entity. And you can see that this is the issue here. And it's Mick Mars feeling like the 3 against 1 now. They're forcing him out of everything he built over 41 years. And I looked up the net worth of Mick Mars, and it's up there in the world. He's fine financially, it looks like. So this probably isn't about money. This is about him feeling completely thrown away by these other band members on something he spent his life building with them, and not being rewarded for that or honored for that or whatever it may be there. So that's essentially what's going on here with this case. And we can go through. I mean, there's a lot of legalese in here. There's quotations to the California Corporation Code. There's lots of things. There's party information, and it talks about who Mick Mars is from a party standpoint, who these various entities are that you have already described. Jurisdiction and venue, that's just saying that the County of Los Angeles is the proper venue for this. And then you get to the factual allegations here. And they're quite interesting to read. I don't know how much time we want to spend here, Keith, but I think we want to get to more of the legal arguments here. So I think anybody can pull this up. I'm assuming you're going to be able to upload this to the YouTube so anybody can download this
Yeah, we'll
complaints.
have this complaint linked down below so you can actually pull up a copy of it. And really, it's these facts that everybody's talking about. And like Justin Hawkins said in his video, these are this is an unfortunate thing for Motley Crue fans, but I think he said it's a delightful drama to sink your teeth into. So that's what these, he has a great way of phrasing that. But that's what these facts are about. But yeah, I think if we drop down and kind of look at the more the legal part of it, it'd be a little bit more on point for us.
Okay, so I think we start there right about here, don't we?
Yeah.
It sounds like there was a severance package that was offered to him. Paragraph 63 goes into that. But then I think 64 is where we get into this 1987 shareholder agreement. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's really interesting because it sounds like what they did is according to this, and of course, these are all based on Mick Mars's allegations, that they offered him a severance that was kind of a take it or leave it type of deal where he'd go from 25% to 5% and then ultimately to 0. And they're asking him to resign as a director and officer of all of the corporations. So again, I think that goes beyond just touring from the looks of it, because there's just so many different entities here and they can't all be for touring. And I think they've described up above that they're not all for touring. So they have this agreement that was entered into in 1987, as you mentioned, and it's this provision right here that you just put on the screen, where it says that a member can be kicked out of the band as a director and officer and even a shareholder for cause. And here's the list of reasons that you have to establish for cause. And so obviously it's things like misconduct, willful breach, being convicted of an offense punishable as a felony involving moral turpitude. That's things like fraud. If you assigned your interest to benefit a creditor, to pay off a creditor, declared to be insane or incompetent, caused the corporation to be convicted of a crime, because corporations can be convicted of crimes. And lastly, engaged in other conduct constituting legal cause for such termination. And that's the clause that the band is using to try to oust Mick Mars, apparently, according to this filing. They're using that clause to say that there's other conduct constituting legal cause. Well, think about that. What is other conduct constituting legal cause for such termination? You don't know that. Nobody can answer that question. Only the trier of fact can answer that question. It's a really open-ended thing. Now, you would think that other conduct constituting legal cause would have to be something, a negative. It couldn't just be that somebody, you don't like somebody or you don't think that they're doing this or that. I mean, it'd have to be some sort of legal cause, you would think. But other conduct leaves it open to interpretation. And that's, of course, where lawyers come in. And that's where lawyers are going to earn their money, arguing over what constitutes other cause. And so you've highlighted down below, and this is one of the things that the band claims is another cause.
And if you look at this, what's interesting how Mick Mars attorneys they're basically forming this argument. They're essentially saying that this catch-all phrase of engaged in other conduct consulting legal cause for such termination, they're basing that on a debilitating disease that Mick Mars has. So how could there's all kinds of issues that come up here. You can't abuse somebody or say that they've done something wrong because they're going through some type of a disease. If somebody was diagnosed with, some kind of aggressive stage 4 cancer in a partnership, you can't have them removed from that partnership because they have that disease. And so it's interesting that this is here. Now, one thing I want to point out is the shareholders agreement was 1987 and after. But if you think about Motley Crue's history prior to 1987, each one of the band members, maybe not Mick Mars, they were engaged in a lot of these things that are part of this contract or this shareholder agreement. So I'm assuming that after they cleaned themselves up, they had several times where they cleaned up and got their act together. Maybe this was put in here so that they would all try to stay on the straight and narrow and continue these cases forward. But
look at 4 above, though. Let's go back to the list of cause. So if you've been declared to be insane or incompetent to manage such shareholders' affairs. So that's really what we're talking about here, is that they have the right to kick you out as a shareholder if you can't manage shareholders' affairs. So when you think about other conduct, the thing that goes through my mind is that it would have to be other conduct that constitutes legal cause to terminate you as a shareholder, meaning that for whatever reason, you're not capable of being a shareholder here. And I think I'm not so sure that playing on tour fits it within that. I think you could, and this is what Mick Mars's attorneys argue, is that, look, he can still be a shareholder. He can even be a director and officer, and he can participate in all the corporate duties that these people have, even if he's not capable of doing the live tours. And yeah, he probably, obviously he shouldn't get paid for the live tours maybe, but that doesn't mean that he can't be a director, officer, and shareholder of these entities. He still could be. That's their argument. And obviously we're only seeing one side of the story here. We haven't seen the other side of the story, but it's a pretty interesting. I mean, I think it's a pretty decent argument to say that, well, I mean, just because you have a debilitating disease that doesn't affect your mental processing, it affects your body. I think you can still be an officer, director, and shareholder, by and large.
That's a good point, Keith. One of the claims that Nikki Sixx has made, apparently, according to Mick Mars, is that Mick Mars, his mental abilities are not what they once were, and he's not able to remember the songs and those kinds of things, at least according to Mick Mars. There's also an issue where there was a statement put out by Motley Crue in response to this civil filing, and I don't remember it word for word, but it was something to the effect that Mick Mars is being taken advantage of by his lawyers, essentially, because he doesn't have the ability to resist what they want him to do, and it's just a money grab. That the lawyers are just trying to get involved because there's money at stake and they want to be involved. So it will be interesting to see exactly what type of response is filed to this verified petition, which that response has to be verified. They have to go through each of the material allegations and respond to each one. Now, many times it's just boilerplate. We don't have enough information to admit or deny, blah, blah, blah. But the point is, Motley Crue is on notice that they have to respond to each one of these issues. And I think if the shareholders agreement, if this is it, if this is everything here, and they're doveholing this into the catch-all phrase at the end that Mick Mars not being able to tour anymore is engaged in other conduct constituting legal cause for such termination, it'll be interesting to see how that legal theory develops, because I don't see it right now. Again, I'm not a entertainment lawyer, but it seems to me that Mick Mars may have the better end of this, at least for the overall group Motley Crue, maybe not the touring revenue that's just limited to touring. Another part of this story is Motley Crue has hired another lead guitarist who's a fantastic guitarist. His name is John Five. He's incredible. He may be one of the best guitarists out there on the planet right now. My question is, does Mick Mars get Motley Crue to disclose how much they're actually paying John Five? Because my gut tells me it's not 25% that would normally be going to Mick Mars. So that will be interesting to find out as well.
Well, think about, could you be a shareholder in, take this out of the Motley Crue context, could you be a shareholder in a company that holds the rights to a band's music? I mean, clearly you can be. I mean, people own the rights and the masters to other people's music. That happens all the time. And then, of course, you think about all these boy bands where, it's not the band members that make the money. It's the people who own the company that make all the money. So you can be a shareholder in a company that has a band, that the business is the band, and not play in the band. I mean, that's just objectively that you can do that. So I think you're right. I think that argument that the band is making might be stronger for some of the entities, like the touring entities, and maybe less strong for some of the other entities that aren't about touring.
So I've skipped a few pages, Keith, got to the end of the complaint or the petition. And again, you'll put that in the YouTube comments area so that people can download it if they want to take a look at it. And you can see this was April 4, and it was signed by his lawyer, Edwin F. McPherson. But then here's the kicker. And there's a verification, and it was signed April 3 in Nashville, Tennessee, because that's where apparently Mick Mars resides. And you can see there his signature is signing this verification. And what does this mean when Mick Mars signs this verification to this petition?
He signed it under penalty of perjury. So that means everything that he says in here, as far as he knows, is true. And you'll see sometimes, and I didn't see a whole lot of it in this filing, but a lot of times lawyers will use the language that on information and belief. And so you'll make an allegation and say, on information and belief, I think that this is true. And so anything that's said as to information and belief, you're not technically verifying it, but I didn't see a lot of that in here. A lot of it are just factual statements. So, okay, well, Mick Mars has now signed it, and under penalty of perjury, he claims that that's the truth. And so it remains to be seen if it actually is the truth. I mean, obviously, you have to hear from the other side, and ultimately, it'll be a trier of fact, which if this is an arbitration, it'll be an arbitrator, which is usually a retired judge, who will ultimately decide who's right and who's wrong. But I would just point out, just as, you know, kind of an overall viewpoint of this, this is it's a very complicated case. There's a lot of entities involved. The language that they're looking at and trying to enforce is open to interpretations a number of different ways. I mean, this is not a clear-cut case. And a lot of times people are saying, they're trying to simplify it down and saying, well, you know, the band doesn't want to pay Mick Mars for the revenue they get on touring. That's the smallest part of this case. This is a big, complicated, messy case because of all these entities and all these issues. So this is going to go on for a while. I mean, the average case in California, even in arbitration, it's going to go on probably for at least 18 to 36 months or longer. I mean, these are very drawn out cases. And now you're getting Mick Mars's attorney. They want to get all this documentation and financial information. Well, what do you do once you have all of that? You have to hire usually an accountant or even a forensic accountant to put together reports. Those people are very expensive for the work they do. It's very time consuming. And then you're also going to have to hire appraisers, because at some point they're probably going to want to figure out what Mick Mars's value of his share of all of these entities are. Well, appraising high-end companies, especially ones that get revenue from trademarks and all those types of things, copyrights, that's going to be really expensive. And so it wouldn't surprise me if they spend $500,000 to $1 million just on appraisers on a case like this, because of all the entities and all the intricate issues. And then they're going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars just on experts, accounting experts, and anybody else. So this is going to be a very involved case. And unless everybody comes to their senses and they decide to settle quickly, it's going to drag on for a long time.
Yeah, and of course, I think, you know, Nikki Sixx has come out many times saying that they don't use backtracks, they don't have any help on the music side of things. That this could hurt their trademark or their brand by not having them when they go on tour. You know, if it comes out that they pretty much have been playing music through recordings and they're up there on stage pumping their fist and that's about it, it's going to hurt that brand. And so this is something that does need to be resolved. I will say too that all those expenses that you just pointed out, that's both sides. Okay, so both sides are going to have their own set of experts, their own accountants, their own appraisers, and there's going to be arguments. And ultimately, a judge or a jury or an arbitrator is going to have to determine which experts are more right. And of course, there will be experts that they'll have. The experts from Mick Mars are going to have one view of things, which will be completely different than the experts from Motley Crue. And so this could get very, very expensive quickly. If we were, you know, nobody's talking to us about this, but what I would suggest is that these guys immediately go to an arbiter or a mediation where everybody, you know, comes in good faith, see if they can work through the issues, see if they can resolve this privately and move on from this. That would be the best course for them. But to do that, they're going to have to address Mick Mars' feeling that he's been completely rejected here, thrown away from something that he believes that he spent 41 years building. And so that has to be addressed. And once that's addressed, and by the way, this isn't the first time that Motley Crue has had problems. They fired Vince Neal way back in the day, might have been 1992-ish, 1991. They've had all kinds of issues and they've always seemed to work it out. So maybe they can all get together, work this out, make Mick Mars feel like he's still part of something and they haven't thrown him away. A way to do that would be to, you know, say that the advisors had advised about all of this, and boy, they wish they hadn't listened to these advisors, and now they want to get together with Mick Mars and work it out as brothers and move on, with a future where they can still go on tour with John 5 or whoever, and Mick Mars can feel good that he's still receiving income and respected for what he built over 41 years.
Well, and there's so many entities here. You could easily make it to where Mick Mars is still a part of some entities, and maybe he's not a part of other entities, and not just throw him out of everything. And I suspect that that's probably what started this feud in the first place, is the feeling of, you're just throwing me out of everything. And so there's a lot of, that's the other thing, is that good lawyers can get creative in these cases, and they can come up with resolutions that kind of bridge the divide if you get creative. And so it doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. So there's a lot of different ways to structure that, but it does require everybody to come to the bargaining table with an open mind. And clearly that's not where the parties are right now. Everybody's dug in, they're mad as hell. And sometimes they have to go through, some litigation and the expenses of that before they start to soften up a little bit. And those numbers I was throwing out, by the way, didn't include attorney's fees. So clearly, if you have the attorney's fees plus the experts and all that, each side is going to spend multiple millions of dollars on this lawsuit. Clearly that's going to, if they take it all the way, if they go the distance. So it would be great if they could come together and resolve it. And I think there's a lot of creative ways to do that, but it does require people to kind of get over those hurt feelings. And that's hard to do.
Yep. So, we'll as things develop in this case, let's put out more YouTubes on it so people can follow it, at least from a legal perspective. And let's see where this thing goes.
Yeah, sounds good. This has been really fun looking into this.
Albertson and Davidson is here to help you fight for your inheritance. Check out aldavlaw.com for our complete library of helpful legal videos and articles from your favorite California trust and will litigation law firm, Albertson and Davidson, LLP.